Hello and welcome back to our third episode of Tactica Tuesdays. This one is a little bit later than normal, but we're doing it live, and I want to apologize because it is all my fault that we are doing it this late. Poor Paul has had to deal with me messing up the schedule probably 3 times today, pushing it back and pushing it back, but I promise it was for a good reason and that you, the audience, will benefit from it. But Paul, thank you so much for joining me and just for your patience today.
It's always a pleasure to be here, and I got to do some other recording and get to do some painting and modeling in the meantime. So time was by far not wasted.
Well, that's good to hear. I spent today trying out the new match play system from the Generals Handbook, which is, as you can probably guess from the title of the video, what we are primarily talking about today, because that's what everyone's talking about. That's the big news.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, we have a few other things to touch on. So, Paul, if you want to go ahead and start us off with your news that you have.
All right, so news and events in general. In the central Connecticut area, we are starting up a regular game day. And we're starting, the first one is going to be this Saturday, July 9th, and then the next one is going to be on July 23rd. And it's going to be at the Portal in Manchester, Connecticut. We're kind of flexible on times. It's going to show up and just kind of get some games in. It's not really structured. But we're going to try and make a pretty regular thing of this and get a regular gaming group going in together and eventually have that hopefully transform into some tournaments, work with other gaming groups nearby, like the Gaming Gruds down in New Jersey and some other folks around in like Massachusetts and Rhode Island to hopefully get some bigger tournaments going. Some of the folks that we're working with are also affiliated with the Unplugged Gamers, so they have some ability to get some tournaments off the ground, hopefully, with some of those connections and experience. So, it should be good. Should be fun. If you're in the Connecticut area, feel free to shoot me an email, paulmconti@gmail.com. I can get you on our mailing list and get you all the information.
Sounds good. My information that I have for the news is about the campaign that's upcoming. I've connected with several other guys who run the Age of Sigmar stuff, that work at different comic book and gaming stores nearby, in part because I used to run one myself. But this is the card that everyone will be receiving that's taking part in the upcoming campaign. At the front here at the bottom, you can see that there's 4 little dots. Each of them has a different symbol, order, chaos, death, and destruction. You will have it marked at your store. You'll put your name, the name of your army, new war scrolls that you'd like to acquire during it. You'll be generating points based upon these models at the front that you buy and during the campaign time. You also generate points for units that you paint, entire war scrolls. Most stores, from the sounds of it, are going to require basically that you just show some picture evidence or some other kind of evidence that you painted the model during this time, not beforehand, and that it was from basically very plastic or primer to this point. Not that you had a model ready, except for it wasn't shaded or highlighted or something and you threw that on. Then at the bottom, you have these points that you can generate for playing games during this time. And then basically your local shop will take these cards at the end of the period, which it ends, I believe it is September 14th. It's roughly there. It's going to be about a month, the total time that this campaign will run. And then your local shop will total up all the points and then send in the results to GW, and that's how they will determine this half of the campaign of which faction won and how that affects the narrative going forth. The other half will be determined by a game or a series of games that will be played by it's a little over 100 now, all of the Warhammer and GW store managers in the North America. They will be half playing as Order, half playing as Chaos. And the outcome of that battle will also affect the storyline. which I have a bit of a hand in that, because there's I think 5 different GW store managers that I personally know that are coming to me for tactical advice on who should they play and what tactics should they employ. And I feel kind of like a, Emperor Palpatine kind of moment, because I'm playing both sides, because I've got, I think, 3 on Chaos and 2 on Order that are coming to me asking for tactics. So fair warning to any of the Chaos players, I am giving little hints. I'm not giving it all away, but little hints to the Order side of what I'm telling y'all to bring and the tactics that I'm tipping y'all off with. So I have.
Are they allowed to play Destruction or Death?
Nope. This is just between Order and Chaos. They have to use either the starter kit from the game or the start collecting boxes from those factions, and then they have a few other things that they can build it out with. The finalized rules are not yet done for that, so it's the advice I've been giving is still a work in progress. But also, real briefly, just minor things on the tournament. You will be getting a pin much like this. This one is from Warhammer 100 store openings. That's not the exact one, but you'll be getting one that represents your faction with the leader of it. So Alariel for Order, Nagash for Death, the named Auric, I can't remember his name, for Destruction, and Archaon for Chaos. You'll also be receiving one of those little like rubber wristbands that you see that are real thin everywhere. Nike and all these other companies do them, that have the 4 Grand Alliance symbols as well printed on it. And I think there's a few other little goodies. Oh, there's a really nice little token punch-out sheet that GW is sent to all the shops to give out for free, which have things like Mystic Shield counters and other stuff like that to help you kind of keep track of some of the effects in game, which I think is really nice. In addition, there are little wound counters that are numbered, I believe, between 1 and 4 that you can place on guys, or also use for like objective markers and things like that. So there's quite a bit that GW is giving out for free to help kind of kick this campaign off. In addition, based upon what your local gaming store decides, it may or may not use the matched point system and the entire match play rules from the Generals Handbook. It's purely on a shop-by-shop determining basis. Some shops, I've been told, will be running the open play system with a very light comp. But from what I hear, most will be using the match play system. Also, there's 4 new battle plans that basically will be played out. There will be one released each week for the campaign. I've already had a look at all 4 of them. They're a lot of fun. I got to play test some of them today. I'd say really look forward to those, because they're all quite different from anything I've seen yet for Age of Sigmar, and they're definitely the kind of missions that you could take and adapt quite easily to make something that you could play over and over and over again that wouldn't necessarily have to be specific to this campaign. Cool. So honestly, that's quite a bit. I was pretty excited to learn all that about the big campaign in the Realm of Life that's coming up.
Nice.
But
like somebody with a lot of information brain dumped on you today.
Yeah. But that's all I've got for this for now. Again, I'll keep everyone updated as much as I can as I learn more. But honestly, the campaign's about to start. We're a little over a week away. I'm
psyched.
I am too. I'm really excited for this. I'm really excited to be part of the shaping narrative.
Yeah, I need to get in touch with my local GW store owner and see how they're actually going to be running it. Start getting my army prepped and all of that for the campaign. So shall we move into our question of the week?
Absolutely. And Paul, you have the question, so go right ahead.
Yeah. So this one comes from Matt, and I am not going to try and pronounce your last name, and I apologize because I will totally butcher it, and I apologize. So we're just going to go with Matt. And he asks, what types of units can really utilize the retreat option, both in a general sense and specific units you can think of? Can you think of any retreating tactical shenanigans in general or for certain units? I find myself rarely using the retreat option, would like to know how to use it more effectively. Oh, man. Personally, I love retreating. I love to fight to run away, much like Jack Sparrow does. So I think I use retreating a lot because I like to set up set up blockades or screens or chaff in the way very frequently, with really strong cavalry usually lined up behind that. And I just let my weaker units take that charge. And once it rolls back around to my turn, now I can just retreat those units out of the way. And I have a nice clear path and a nicely set up charge for my turn. That is one of my favorite ways to do it. And I don't know sometimes how I get away with it as often as I do, because it's just one of those things that, like, your opponent's got to see this coming, right? like you've got to see that 1-2 punch coming. The other nice thing that you can do, speaking of a 1-2 punch, is kind of trading off with cavalry. When you have units of cavalry that have charge bonuses, if you send one in one turn and leave another one behind it, then the second turn you retreat the first one out and charge the second one in, so that you constantly have like one unit in combat and one unit that is out of combat, so that you're constantly in with a fresh unit with your charge bonuses.
In addition, that's going to pin your opponent down to where they can't take that unit and then charge you, so you're guaranteeing that you get the charge off,
right?
As opposed to them.
And if they decide to retreat themselves, they're going to be in a situation where they've got two different highly mobile units trying to chase them down, and that's not going to be a good time for them.
And if they do retreat, then that potentially sets up the situation where both of your units could charge in and wipe them out in one turn. Right. If it's been for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So James, what do you like to use retreating for?
Well, ironically enough, I already have a video that talks about this on my channel, the tactics of using this and all. So I'll link that down below after the show. But I think you nailed it. I think that it's very good for those kinds of situations. For myself, most often the applications that I use charging for is when I find a unit that I consider important in a situation that's not advantageous. Today, in testing out the Generals Handbook and the match play system, I had three instances where I withdrew from combat and retreated. I had my general, who was the Coven Throne, retreat out of a group of 30 zombies, which were just going to tar pit her the entire time. The objective for this game, which this is going to be your week 4, assuming that your store plays them week by week of these special missions, is you have basically a keep, and your opponent has a keep, and they have saves and all this stuff, but you're trying to destroy your opponents before they destroy yours. And so, my commander, being a Coven Throne, that's obviously got a lot of attacks and has a good chance of doing significant damage to something like that. I wanted to withdraw her from that, so I pulled her out of it on my turn and ran her over a building so that the zombies would not be able to move and charge her, because between her movement of, I believe, 14 inches, plus she can fly, plus the run distance, being able to move directly over the terrain, far outpaced what the zombies would be able to catch up in that single turn. In addition, I had my Blood Knights, which was the first time I've gotten to use them. They're an amazing unit. I cannot highly recommend them enough for death. You were looking at a legitimate 5-attack cavalry unit that on the charge, the 3 attacks that the rider generates are D3 damage each. You're restoring a lost rider every single turn on your hero phase if you've taken the banner icon. The horses are a 4-up, which is really good for a horse with 2 attacks. So you can legitimately count on, a 3 to 4 successful hits, and then 2 to 3 successful wounds almost every single turn per model on average. Again, they're really, really powerful, but they had been charged by a Terrorgeist and a unit of 10 Hex Wraiths. And clearly, if they're not on the charge and they're being hit by that much of an opponent's army, which that's in the area of 700 points against them, that's not an advantageous position, and I don't want them there, because I want them to be able to continue to move forward to try to hit my opponent's stronghold or hit their high priority units like a Manfred, or their commander who was a vampire on Nightmare, or whatever their horse is called. So retreating them out, running them away, putting them in a place to where they're moving forward towards the opponent. excuse me, so that even if they were charged by something like the Terrorgeist in my opponent's next turn, I'm in a position to where I could move within combat within the 3 inches, or pile in and potentially kind of continue leapfrogging forward via the pile ins towards other units towards my objective. So moving forward towards the objective, even if you know that you're going to be caught back up, is another option for retreating to continue to move yourself forward. I also pulled a single Hex Wraith out of combat that had the rest of his squad had been destroyed, and the reason I retreated him out of combat was to make room for other units to continue their press forward down the game board, because obviously you can't move through opponents, and some terrain you can't move through, so sometimes you have to open up that channel by moving out of maybe an advantageous combat for something that you're setting up later down the line, which may be better for you overall. Those are the uses that I often use for it.
Yeah. One of the other things that I can think of to use too is just to get yourself out of a bad combat situation where you're just not gaining anything by being in combat. Right. And by withdrawing from that combat, you're possibly going to give your opponent decisions to make. And if you have an advantage in terms of movement, you may put them in a position where they're going to fail a charge the next turn.
Right.
I ran into that situation the last game I played. I didn't actually end up retreating. I just kind of stuck out the combat just because I wanted to continue to just kind of target the unit where it was. But I could have, I had Outriders up against Blood Warriors. Mm-hmm. The Outriders move 12, the Blood Warriors move 5. If I had retreated and ran the Outriders, they probably would have been in a long charge distance for the Blood Warriors the next turn. So they would have, and the Blood Warriors were far enough away from other things that they wouldn't have had a good charge to anything else either.
Yeah.
So it would have been just denying my opponent the use of that unit for at least one turn. And then by retreating, now I get the option with my Outriders to, on the next turn, I can't shoot with them while they're retreating, but in subsequent turns, now I can keep moving away and shooting at those Blood Warriors and other things and stay on the outside and keep harassing and picking off a couple of wounds here and there, which can be really valuable later on in the game.
Yeah, truly employing that kind of kiting guerrilla warfare tactics is certainly an option. And I should have mentioned it, but I didn't. Whenever I retreated the whole scenario where I retreated the Blood Warriors out of combat, where they were with the Hex Race and the Terrorgeist, part of why I did that was I had a group of 30 zombies ready to charge right in and tar pit and keep those units pinned down anyways, so that they couldn't chase after my Blood Warriors, and my Blood Warriors were free to continue kind of rampaging through my opponent's line. But that kind of touches back on the topic that we touched on last week of how chaff is employed in Age of Sigmar, and how it can really benefit your other units so well, especially in scenarios where you need to withdraw for whatever tactical reason and keep those opponent's units pinned down to where they can't catch you.
Yeah, and I think a good example of kind of the opposite side of this is what happens when you don't retreat when you kind of had the option to. In my last game, I had a unit of Grail Knights that I kind of had just a mental lapse and forgot that I charged the previous turn, not that turn. So they were already in combat. They had blown through a unit the turn before, but they were still within 3 inches of another couple of different units. So I piled in against a Mighty Lord of Khorne and made attacks. Well, Grail Knights are significantly powered down when they're not charging, and their armor save is actually less when they're not charging. So they didn't do much damage at all to the Mighty Lord of Khorne. And then on the crackback, the Mighty Lord of Khorne smoked the entire unit. In one shot. So that was definitely a big lesson in, I probably should have taken that extra turn, retreated, gotten out of the way, and then had that extra turn to come in after and get my full charge bonuses, and not just sat there and taken hits from the mighty Horn when I was at suboptimal power.
Absolutely. Yeah, using that withdrawal to put you on your best footing.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like a duelist, I mean, I'm sure just about everybody has seen a movie like a Star Wars or whatever, and even in those, they illustrate the advantage of sometimes withdrawing for a moment.
Yeah.
Any kind of good duelist movie, show, whatever, will do so. Do you have anything else before we move on to the spotlight?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, every week I'll continue to point out why we do this, but every week we spotlight videos on YouTube, typically part of the Warhammer community that we really like and think others should check out for whatever good reason, because as I've said before, there is honestly nothing better for us as YouTube content creators, because it's not like we make any money doing this. This is purely a work of passion. There's nothing more important or nothing that kind of boosts the confidence and encouragement of like, hey, keep doing this, more than having someone kind of shout out your work and say, hey, that was good, I enjoyed that, whatever it might be. Even a simple thumbs up on a video goes a long way towards encouraging all of us to continue to do more. So for this one, I wanted to spotlight a man who really needs no more encouragement, because he has a huge channel, he's wildly successful, and although he'll never admit it, he's probably aware of the fact, because he's too humble, I'm not trying to say anything else. He is perhaps the best, in my opinion, YouTube content producer there is, and that's Vince Venturella. He is a published game designer. He's worked on the 5th edition D&D. He was part of the group of people that was consulted for that on the outside. But he does a series of game design videos every now and again on YouTube, which I think are terrific. And he did one that, like I said, I will link below, that was on the importance of offense over defense in tabletop war games, especially, and how offense, even if it's not necessarily a significant thing in the grand scheme of things achieved, but if you are rolling dice and removing opponents' models or destroying stuff or whatever, and it kind of gives you that emotional positive response, you kind of have that feel good, like, hey, I did something, hey, I accomplished something, how that's more advantageous towards a good game and a good playing experience for players than really, really good defense. And the reason I wanted to point that out is I'll talk about it more in the main topic, but the evolution of the death faction between the open play system and the new match play system has completely changed, and how the death faction has become a very, very strong defensive team. Perhaps, I haven't had a wide enough playing experience yet with all the different factions, but perhaps, the most anvil-like of all the factions, and just the difficulty that opponents are going to have in removing any models from the table, including zombies, is quite honestly surprising. And I do think that it lessens the play experience for your opponent, for an opponent of the death faction. But again, I'll touch more on that whenever we get to the main topic. But that's why I wanted to spotlight this video this week.
All right, and what I've got for us this week is MC1 Gamer. He did a great series when Age of Sigmar first released the Unlocking Age of Sigmar series, going through each compendium in Age of Sigmar, talking about all of the units, all of the war scrolls, everything. Now that we've got basically Age of Sigmar 2.0 with the release of the Generals Handbook, he's revisiting all of those videos again, revisiting all of the factions, and looking at how the Generals Handbook is impacting how all of those factions are going to be playing. I was lucky enough to be his first guest earlier today. Did an overview of the free people in Age of Sigmar with the Generals Handbook. I believe James is going to be on soon as well, talking about death.
Yeah, we'll be recording tomorrow. Does he do those as live streams normally, or is that a recording?
Live streams.
Okay, then look forward, I believe, to us doing it tomorrow, unless something else comes up where we will be covering all of the Death Grand Alliance.
Yes, I'm sure that's going to take all day.
Yeah. I get off at 2 p.m. tomorrow, so I've basically got all day.
Yeah. So his videos are always fantastic. Definitely go check that out. We'll link that down below as well.
Absolutely. Well, now that we're done with that, we come to the main topic. And Paul, you really dragged me into this one. I'm only halfway joking. Paul was super excited to do the match play and talk about, how this is changing Age of Sigmar, at least, compared to what it was before. Obviously, you can continue to play open play. There's narrative play. There's the path to glory for all the different factions. We have so many different ways to play it, but just in the transition from the original open play to this match play and how different that is. And of course, with, all the leaks and rumors coming out, the fact that the rulebook is really not that far away, Paul felt it would be an opportune time to jump on this, and I agree. So Paul, why don't you go ahead and introduce the topic and kind of start us off, because this is truly your brainchild of a topic.
All right. Yeah. Originally, we were actually going to have a different main topic this week. We were originally going to talk about Sylvaneth release,
right?
And we decided to push that off because we got all of these leaks. We didn't want to delay any further talking about all of the leaks that came out. So, match play in the Generals Handbook is basically taking us back to a game structure and a point system that harkens back to prior editions of Warhammer. The general concept overall is that we have, a point system. Each unit in the game is going to get a points value. The points values are based on a minimum unit size that is laid out in the General's Handbook. All of those minimum unit sizes are not necessarily the minimum unit size that is on the War Scroll. There are some that are different from that are more than that.
We also have a maximum unit size as well.
Right. There's also a maximum unit size. Excuse me. Took a drink and it inhaled instead of swallowed, apparently. So that is really the biggest chunk of it. This also came with a few rules, tweaks, and clarifications.
Can I interrupt real quick? Just one more thing, just to make sure we establish this all groundwork-wise. In addition to setting the minimum unit size, anytime that you build out a War Scroll, but anywhere between the minimum and maximum, you buy them basically by the amount that the minimum is. So if the minimum is a 5, you pay the points for 5 until for 5 of them at a time until you get to the maximum, or 10 or whatever it might happen to be.
Right. And that's very important, because prior to this, in prior editions of Warhammer, you were always buying things one model at a time, and now we're buying them in minimum unit sizes at a time. So that's a pretty big change. Also, just sort of a technical, nerdy sort of bit that a bunch of us have noticed and started talking about is all of the points values are in intervals of 20. So they didn't get super precise on these point values. They are rounded off to pretty big round numbers. So they weren't using a really big sophisticated algorithm for these, I don't think. I think they were trying to keep it simple. And I think at least in my opinion, it seems to be working pretty well.
I would agree.
So real quick on rules changes, we have the 3 rules. Also, anytime you roll a 1 to hit or to wound or to save, a 1 is always going to be a failure. Even if you have like a 1-up save, rolling a 1 is still going to be a failure. You can only cast any instance of a spell once per turn, so like only 1 Mystic Shield can be cast per turn. And the third one is anytime you have something like a Ripperdactyl that can theoretically generate an infinite loop of attacks, it can only generate 1 additional attack per model.
Yeah, 1 additional attack per that die.
Right.
Right. Yeah. I also want to point out with the spell abilities, it is once per per turn for you and for your entire side. So for example, if you have 2 spellcasters, only one of them can cast Mystic Shield on your turn, and that's whether they get it off, whether they fail, whether it's denied. Any time that they attempt it, that is your attempt for your turn. Doesn't matter if it's successful, denied, or you fail. No more until your next turn.
Yep. There were a couple of other minor things in there, and I'm trying to remember what those other minor tweaks were. The summoning changes, that was a fairly major one, that you can't summon basically outside of your list. You know, you have if you're playing a 2,000 point game, you bring 2,000 points of stuff with you, and that you can set stuff aside and not deploy everything to, so you have like a summoning pool at the beginning of the game.
It's actually slightly different. You're really close. What it is if you're playing a 2,000 point game, and I understand, Paul, because you don't play summoning armies, but if you're playing a 2,000 point game and you bring 1,400 points of models, you can choose to keep aside that 600 points and say, this is my summoning pool. You don't have to specify what units it is or tie it down in any way. It's fully what you need at the time.
That's
you set aside those points. Yep.
So it's just totally open. So that's the advantage of keeping that then.
Right. It's something reactionary.
Very interesting. I'm trying to remember. There were a couple of other minor rules changes too, weren't there?
There were, but they honestly, most of them were so insignificant. I'm not even sure that they're really worth covering. Like there's the 3 different types of basic battle plans that are played out for this. You know, basically you'll like roll off like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or you can just again agree with your opponent. That's what they recommend anyways with this. It's in the match play section of the Generals Handbook. There were 1 or 2 other really tiny ones that I sent you, but they're not a big deal. If you don't have them, you're not really losing anything in terms of the way the game plays.
All right. Now, continuing on to army construction, we're going back to something that harkens back to prior editions where we have limitations on the number of heroes that we can bring. They call them leaders in the Generals Handbook. That's their kind of like classification designation in the Generals Handbook. As far as I've seen, it's only things that had a hero keyword in the War Scrolls, and that's exclusively it. Like everything that had a hero keyword is a leader. Nothing that did not have a hero keyword is a leader. So
I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's every hero that's come out for every faction has a designation of leader. Right. But I can't say 100% sure. I know for sure Death is that way, but I'm not sure if it's true for every faction.
Right. You're required to take a minimum of 1, and your general for your army must be a leader. And depending on the size of the game, your maximum number of leaders will vary with the size of the game. I believe at 1,000 points, it's 4, and then 6 at 2,000. Is that right?
I think it's 2 or 3 at 1,000. It's 4 at 2,000, and it's 6 at 2,500. Those are the 3-point values that they give in the Generals Handbook.
Yeah, I don't have that right in front of me at the moment. I'm trying to find all of this different stuff. There's all of these leaks are in several different locations, so it's hard to actually keep track of all of them.
But also, you know, this is very much classic GW. Like it's definitely classic fantasy, I know that, but this is the model that GW follows in their games, right? If you've played any of their other games, whether it be 40K, Lord of the Rings, or Warhammer Fantasy, or probably some of the others that I haven't personally played, like maybe Mordheim or whatever, but at least in the big 3 that I know of, you always have this kind of this what do you want to call it? Like the army building composition that you have to follow, right? You have, for example, in 40K, you have your HQ and your troop choices, and that's what you have to build for the standard way to play. And this is just, again, echoing and kind of going back to that sentiment.
Yep. Our next classification is our battle line troops, which that is very much like what core was in prior editions of Warhammer. Sounds like that's what troop choices are in 40K.
Yep.
So these are just your minimum number of mandatory kind of generic dudes that you're required to take. It's worth noting in here that although in prior editions of Warhammer, all of these things were point values that you were restricted to or required to take, now it's number of units. So it's a number of battle line units, it's a number of leaders, it's a number of artillery pieces, it's a number of behemoths. Something that you actually could kind of do in 8th edition, and was something that people did, was basically just take one giant Death Star unit to fill out their core. Like, you really could do that with certain factions. Or take one really big unit and then have one like tiny support unit of some kind. And this is really forcing you to really take a fairly significant chunk of stuff.
Unless you're min-maxing.
Unless you're min-maxing, right? And that's, I think, the first thought that really comes to my head with this is some factions have really cheap options for battle line units. So
Right.
Sometimes it's almost going to be like you're just kind of paying your tax and you're going to pay as little as possible to just fill out that requirement and then max out power in the rest of your list wherever you can.
Yeah. And really in the whole kind of Death Star theme, again, Death Faction is the army I play. It's the one I know the best, so most of my examples come from that. But you can kind of Voltron it up, as Vince and Tom said the other day on their show, where we all talked about this, where you can bring, for example, 3 units of zombies to fill out your minimum at the 2,000 for your battle line troops, and then combine them all into one squad. So you do, to a much lesser degree, get that larger kind of more powerful Death Star unit that manages to fill up all 3 of the requirements. And Death can do this dirt cheap. If you bring the 3 zombie squads at 60 a pop, and then you bring even a Karen Wraith at 60, you can escape at 240. Or if you want to bring the cheapest caster that they have, which is the Ghoul King on foot, which is 100, you can get out of it at 280, and you have a magic wielder who can start summoning on more units instantly.
Right. Yeah. So it's an interesting one, and there's, at the same time, there's some really fairly powerful battle line units. I know, I'm looking at my own army at the Free People list. It looks like, if you can take a big unit of Knights of the Realm, they're filling a battle line requirement, and they're relatively inexpensive for their power level, and you can take like a block of 16 Knights for 440 points, and those things are just going to make anything explode that they touch. And because there's that many Knights, whatever they charge, they're going to just be able to kind of spread out and pile in against several different units at one time. There's some interesting possibilities with this for sure. I am very intrigued to see where this whole battle line thing goes. I had never bothered to really model up any Knights Errant or Knights of the Realm, and once I saw these point lists, that was the first thing I did. I was like, okay, I know I have these in a box somewhere. I am gonna actually put these together and put primer on them and get them painted eventually.
So, with the 2 things that you just talked about, right, that there's basically the really cheap units that you can basically, pay your tax and move on, or you can seriously sink some points into a battle line unit, and because it's a powerful unit, it's a viable unit, whatever you want to say. With you playing Free Peoples and with your personal play style, which way do you see yourself leaning towards more and more often? Are you going to just kind of pay the tax and get it out of the way as cheaply as possible, or are you more likely to heavily invest in this because you're like, this is a valuable unit that can significantly impact my game, so I'm going to invest more points heavily than 25%, right? Including like a hero and getting all my mandatory stuff out of the way for 25% or less.
Well, the glory of the free people is that the answer to that question is yes. Our most powerful shooting infantry is battle line. Like our handgunners and our crossbows and our archers are all battle line units. So I guess I'll just take those. I was going to take them anyway. And they're cheap. You know, they're 100 points for 10. So I was going to take a whole bunch of those anyway. You know, am I more likely now to go and take, you know, 2 squads of 10 archers and vanguard them up at the beginning of the game to use them as chaff? Yeah, I'm a lot more likely to do that than I was before, just because now they're so much cheaper than they were under a lot of other comp systems, or, you know, if you were doing a wound comp or various other things. You know, they feel like they're appropriately costed, and then like handgunners feel like they are under costed at 100 points for a unit. You know, taking 200 points for a unit of 20 of those, and they're hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s with rend. I'll take that all day long.
So you're more likely to invest, not necessarily like a huge chunk, but a significant amount in your battle line.
I think Free People just has really good battle line options. So
right.
They're units that I was going to take anyway.
Right. It makes sense. I'm not trying to say like just because it's battle line. I'm just saying you know, more because of the way that the chips fell, right? That's the way you'll be leaning. With my faction, most of the time I will probably be building out my battle line as cheap as I can do. Again, the 3 zombies, they're versatile to a degree. They have, you know, because you can keep them split up, you can join them together, whatever you really need in the moment. They have their definite role, and even at 180 points for the 3 squads, they're useful. So I'll probably be doing it about as cheap as I can to throw in other things like Blood Knights and all that are bigger, scarier, and have other impacts on the battlefield besides being more of a speed bump or more of that chaff roll that the zombies can really do. But that's not to say that that'll always be it, because, you know, for death we do have the option, again, playing across the entire Grand Alliance, of bringing large units of skeletons, for example. And when you do so, they are certainly have the potential to be an imposing offensive force. Whenever you bring, for example, 30 of them, you combine them with like a White King or a Necromancer. If that White King happens to be your leader, you're looking at up to 8 attacks each. So they can be quite imposing, but that won't be something that I do as often, and that's not typically what I would recommend for other players who play the death faction. Typically, I'm like, pay your tax and move on.
Yeah, and you also have the advantage of, you know, like that block of 30 zombies is something you were probably going to take anyway.
Right. I would take that. I prefer zombies to almost everything in death. I had 10 bases. I've lost 10 somewhere, but I had 10 bases from a new skeleton pack that I bought the other day. And I'm like, do I build these 10 skeletons and put them on the bases? Nope. Y'all are gonna have to wait. I have 10 zombies waiting for bases. Let's go. I'd rather have the zombies than just about anything else.
Right. Yeah. And it makes me wonder. I need to go through more in detail and look at all of the different armies, but it makes me wonder what factions is this really going to be a tax for? You know, where is this going to be something where you're stretching and saying, oh man, I really have to just take these troops and I don't want to.
So you mean in kind of like a significant way that it maybe encumbers you or limits your force?
Yeah, exactly. Like what factions are there going to be that it's like, I have to sink all these points into my battle line, and I would rather be spending these points somewhere else. It feels like most of the battle line troops, because of the way they built out Age of Sigmar, with all of the troops being basically playable, and now they seem like they've put relatively fair point values on all of them. It seems like even though they've got even though they've got battle line stamped on a lot of these units, it seems like a lot of them you're just going to play anyway. Right. So I don't feel like there is as much of a like core tax like there was in prior editions.
I would agree with that. And really, if you, for whatever reason, like feel like your particular army, whatever it is, chaos or or whatever, doesn't matter. If you feel for whatever reason that even with all the options that you have available to your Grand Alliance, that they're not advantageous, then there is always the option that you can kind of go with the sub factions, and then oftentimes you'll gain different units that are opened up to you as available battle line options. So if you're playing Order but you're only interested in playing Sylvaneth, then you have, of course, the Dryads, but now with the new Sylvaneth expansion, you have, I believe it's one of the two Revenants that becomes an additional battle line. So so you can kind of specialize and open up more options for yourself, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. And if anybody is running an army that they're really disappointed in their battle line options and are really going to be stretching and are kind of pissed off about it, definitely leave that down in the comments below. I'm really curious to see, because I haven't had a chance to really look in depth at all the individual units yet. I've really just been looking at my own forces, and I've been pretty happy with what I've seen so far. So yeah, let us know if you think there's anything that's total BS that's in any of these factions with the battle line. Let us know and we can talk about it.
Absolutely. Other than death, I don't want to hear people complain about, oh, I play just Death Rattle and this is all I get. I'm like, death, perhaps more than any other faction, you have to play as a Grand Alliance if you want to truly play competitive effectively with it. If you're going to limit yourself to one of the teeny tiny little sub factions of like 4 or 5 units, I don't want to hear you complaining. You are pocketing yourself into far too small of a force to ever be competitive in any game.
Right. Yeah, and I'm just as kind of an aside, I'm really personally hoping that death is like the big thing that they just keep expanding, that we get a lot more releases like the Flesh Eater Courts, that we start getting like death factions that are real factions, that
right,
where it's not just like, oh, you just take the Grand Alliance death and you kind of take a bit of everything. And I'd like to see it fall out a lot more, at least like more like Destruction is, where there's at least bigger chunks of stuff.
Yeah, or Order even. I mean, you've got the Stormcast, you've got the Sylvaneth, you've got all these different sub-factions that are fully playable by themselves, competitively even. Yeah, I agree. I'd love to see that. I think that the split has hit us the hardest in terms of that way, but of course, fortunately, GW had the foresight to say, hey, you can play the entire alliance by themselves. Oh, that's one of the things that we were trying to think of, the minor points. In match play, you have to pick a GA and you have to stay within it. There is none of this order with chaos or order with destruction or order with death. It is you pick the one Grand Alliance and that's what your entire force has to be built out of.
Yep, and for some people that is that might upset some people. I know a friend of mine plays an army that's it's actually a really cool army. I like the fluffy side of it, and it's probably gonna have to be relegated to fluffier games, or just bending the rules a little bit for our games with it. But he plays basically Chaos Dwarves, but in the fluff, the Chaos Dwarves created the Black Orcs as like slave warriors. So he's got a group of like core Chaos Dwarves, and then he's got a whole bunch of Black Orcs backing them up. So it's a cool fluffy force, and it's a lot of fun. But unfortunately, under these rules, you can't actually play that force.
Right. At least not exactly as that. I've kind of gotten around it because I'm working on, I've talked about it a lot, but I'll mention it here as well, that I'm working on an undead Sylvaneth force. I think it would be awesome. That's one of the things I like about death is really you can take about pretty much anybody else's models and convert it up a little bit and be like, it's a dead anything, right? And so I'm fielding the Sylvaneth models, especially with this new release, in place of the Flesh Eater Courts. I'm fielding them as the profiles of them. So for example, Dryads, or I'm fielding as regular old ghouls. Their stats are very similar anyways, and also there are ways you can kind of get around it, but yeah, I understand that's not always the case.
Yep.
So do you want to touch on the faction specific command abilities that we gain and all?
Oh yeah. Let's
I'll lock it on you for this.
Yeah, lock on me, and I will share my screen here. I'll flip over to that.
There we go.
All right, so we'll
Starting
start
with the best.
Yeah, starting with the end, of course. So as we'd mentioned, each Grand Alliance gets a battle trait, which is just sort of a universal new rule for that Grand Alliance. And then you get command traits as well. You get one command trait automatically. You can either choose your command traits or roll on a d6 on the table below. Let me just scooch this down a little further so we can actually see those. And if you are solely within one faction, you get a second command trait. So, for example, if you are playing just Stormcast Eternals, then you get the battle trait and 2 command traits.
Also, let's point out real quick that if you are entirely within one of those sub-factions, be it Flesh Eater Courts, Stormcast, Eternals, whatever it might be, if you choose to gain the additional battle line units that you gain access to by only playing that sub-faction, you do not get the Grand Alliance battle trait. It's one or the other.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's interesting. That was a rule that I did not know about. All right. Yeah. Learning new things today. So, and then the next piece is on the next page, the artifacts. You'll get 1 artifact to give to one of your heroes. These are similar to magic items in prior editions. You'll automatically get 1 for every battalion that you purchase. You get an additional artifact to give to one of your heroes. It can be your general, does not have to be your general.
And you can only give any hero 1, but you do automatically get 1. But like Paul said, you gain 1 for every additional battalion that you bring.
And the command traits and artifacts, neither command traits nor artifacts can be given to unique heroes.
Yeah.
So your Karl Franz on Deathclaw can't get an artifact because he's special enough already as it is.
Yep. This is just another way that GW is introducing the ability for you to kind of create your own characters by using the generic ones, which I'm obviously a big fan of.
Yeah, definitely. And some of these abilities are pretty strong. Others are a little bit fallen flat. James, Death is your army of choice. You want to take this one off and start talking about these?
Sure. The Deathless Minions battle trait that you get if you choose Grand Alliance Death, which, why wouldn't you? It's better than any of the little extra battle line units that you gain by playing within one of the teeny tiny sub-factions. Is basically you get a 6-up ward save for everything that's within 10 inches of your general or any other hero in your army. Now, I want to note that's not just units that are not heroes. That's everything. That includes the heroes themselves because they are within 10 inches of themselves. And it says units, not troops, not anything else like that. So that's a hugely important thing because that means, your commander now, whoever it might be, has a 6-up ward save and all these other little heroes. So your heroes, even if they're not spellcasters, have in a way become a battery, much like the Flesh Eater Courts have with their courtiers and their ability to kind of buff their own squads and add units back to them and things like that. It's a very similar gameplay mechanic. And then on the command table, there's a lot of different ones. These harken back, I've been told, to different rules from different characters within the vampire accounts and other death factions like Tomb Kings and all from older editions. But the one that you really want to pay attention to is the first one, which is Ruler of the Night, which says you add 1 to the roll for your Deathless Minions, which basically just means that your 6-up ward save is now a 5-up. And it's also important to note that this ward save, if you will, is after you failed any other kind of armor saves that you may have, and you roll against the wound, not the damage. So, for example, if you are rolling your armor save against an attack that's a damage 2, you would take a single armor save against that one attack. But if your armor save fails, you will take 2 saves of this ward save type of thing against it, because you're saving against each individual point of damage that you've taken. So it operates a little bit differently than an armor save, but it works in conjunction with it. The other ones, they're decent. Master of the Black Arts, basically your general becomes a wizard. If he's already a wizard, then he gets a +1 to all casting and unbinding rolls. So you can take, for example, if you took a Death Rattle only army, then you can turn that White King into a wizard. I'm going to be honest, none of the others are really worth touching on. I don't know why you would take 2, 3, 4, or 6. 2 is only useful if you're in cover. 3 is extremely circumstantial. I'm sorry, not 4, 5, or 6. 5 again is circumstantial, and 6 is just pretty much garbage. Unless you're playing Skaven or something. But yeah, you'll really only probably be taking 1 or 4, but probably just 1.
Yep. Unless you're rolling on the table, in which you have a 1 in 6 chance of getting one that you want.
If you're rolling on the table, you're doing one of 2 things. You're trying to handicap yourself, or you're just crazy with this table.
Yeah, or you're playing it at an event where you're rolling on the table.
Which is handicapping, yeah.
Yeah. All right, and then our artifacts of death.
We have several good ones. I don't want to talk too much about all of them. I just want to touch on the top, I guess the top 4, and I'll make it real quick. All of these are based upon our items and artifacts that we've already seen within the Death faction, within various war scrolls in Age of Sigmar, such as the Ring of Immortality is a toned-down version of what Vlad von Karstein has. Vlad allows you to completely come back from the dead if you make a certain roll, I believe it is, a 2-up. This Ring of Immortality is when you die, you basically move them 12 inches away from where they had been, you roll, and you recover D3 wounds. The Tomb Blade or the Ring of Immortality is nice because you can use it on any size character. So, for example, if you give it to your general, who is doesn't have to be your general, but I would often expect it is, at the 440 points that they are, your Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, and you've given them a Blood Chalice, your Zombie Dragon can, slowly take a beating and die. Then you can recover D3 with the Ring of Immortality, and then D6 with the Blood Chalice, and all of a sudden, boom, your Zombie Dragon is nearly at full health again. The Tomb Blade is particularly useful if you're taking a hero or if your general is the Coven Throne, because that's one of the few really big units that you can take for death that doesn't heal itself. It has no way to. But the Tomb Blade basically allows you to do the same thing that most vampiric units do, and if you inflicted a casualty in combat, then you heal 1 wound each turn. The Cloak of Mist and Shadows is very similar to what Heinrich Himmler has. As opposed to rolling on Himmler's, you roll 2d6, you move that many inches away. And this one, you can just pick up your model off the table, move it up to 12 inches away, but further than 3 inches away from any enemy, and put it back on the table. There's no other restrictions. So that's quite good it's basically a free retreat out of combat if you need to. But you can still move and charge and operate normally. So it's a very good one. Again, it's not based upon model size. So your Coven Throne, your Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, your Gold King on Terrorgeist, all of them are going to have access to this ability. And the final one is the Sword of Unholy Power. It's a single time use per battle item, but basically it allows you to cast a spell that summons minions onto the table that have the keyword of death, and it's a spell that automatically goes off and cannot be denied. Can't be dispelled or anything like that. So this is like, if it's good if you are in a situation and you're like, I really need this Terrorgeist, or I really need this thing to show up, and maybe your opponent has a superior wizard to you that can, basically out duel you in this magical duel. The Sword of Unholy Power is basically your one-time trump card to get that unit on the table when you absolutely need it. And those are the 4 really good ones. The other 2 aren't terrible, but they're not, in my opinion, on the same level as those.
So now here's the question for you, right? How does this change how you would play a Death Army? How, like, between this and the command traits?
Well, it changes a lot. Honestly, the Death faction before, more often than not, I would choose a generic hero like a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon as my general for multiple reasons, but the most pertinent one for this was because I thought that was the best command ability. The Death faction, really, most of their named heroes don't have particularly impressive commander effects unless you're talking like a Nagash level character. But those units did. Some of the unnamed ones, and then this just gives you additional reasons to choose it, because if you bring the named character, that's fine. You know, they're still worth sometimes their points and the weight that they kind of bring to your force on the battlefield. But by choosing an unnamed character, not only do you get in Death faction oftentimes a superior commander effect to the named ones, but you are gaining these additional abilities and really increasing the power level of your entire army. If you take, for example, if you'll scroll back up, Paul, to the other one, so I can just kind of point it out. If you take first off the battle trait and then the command trait table number 1, and you're giving your entire army basically this 5-up ward save, that takes units like Blood Knights to a whole new level, where against a non-rend weapon, they're looking at a 3-up, 5-up before you sit them on terrain, before you sit them on with a Mystic Shield or anything like that. You're taking characters like your Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, if you give them the Ancient Shield, again to a 3-up, 5-up. And so many of the Death faction units have the ability to regen models or to heal models, or they may not even have a save like a zombie, but all of a sudden now you have a 1 in 3 chance of shrugging off that wound. It just increases your staying power by so much. It used to be that with the Death faction, this was part of what worried me when I saw the initial things for the Generals Handbook and the limits on summoning and spellcasting. It used to be that for Death, you really had to constantly be summoning the little chaff units onto the table because they were getting blown off almost as fast as you could put them on. But with this, that's not the case. In the game I played today, for example, I had a unit of 30 zombies that for 4 straight turns were in combat with a Terrorgeist and 10 Hex Wraiths. And I lost 10 zombies I was at 20 zombies at the end of that game, still in that combat, because between their ability to gain new zombies on a roll of a 6 every time you kill an opponent's model, to restore D6 zombies with the totem or the banner that they can carry, and that's not a unique ability. A lot of Death units have that. And then this 5-up ward save, it's nearly impossible to remove your units from the table, and you only gain access to this extreme kind of defensive abilities if you have that generic character. And then if you go back, Paul, to the other list, the artifacts, if you're, depending on what character you're taking, generic character you're taking for your general, you have so many different ways that you can basically plug and fill in the weaknesses that character has. Today I took the Coven Throne because it's a 260 point leader, and it's the Behemoth, which we'll touch on in a minute what that really means. But it's a really good leader, but its one weakness is it can't heal itself, unlike so many of the other Death faction leaders. But by taking the Tomb Blade, I allowed myself to be able to recover wounds every time I killed something. So if you're fighting something, an opponent that has their chaff, and you need to start recovering a couple wounds, then your commander has the option to just hurl themselves into that and kind of feed on them. And that was an ability that things like the Coven Throne were lacking. If you're taking things like the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon and the Ring of Immortality, again, combined with the Blood Chalice, like I said earlier, just takes your survivability to a whole new level. And that's already a hardy monster. A Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon's offensive traits don't diminish very much, even when you take a significant amount of wounds. So by increasing your staying power on the battlefield by the huge amount that this does, is just multiplying the effectiveness that your model has on the table. I also want to point out that perhaps I shouldn't have taken the Tomb Blade today, but the Cloak of Mist and Shadows may be the kind of sneaky one here that's may actually be the most valuable piece of these artifacts that you can take, because the ability to pull yourself out of a combat instantly, move up to 12 inches away, and then move and charge and do everything else as you normally would is an ability that I don't think you can put a price on. Just the power level of that to move out, hit something that's vulnerable, to move out if you're in a vulnerable position, or to move out to complete an objective, destroy a target, whatever it might be. That in and of itself is a game-winning ability right there.
Right. So it seems like overall, Death's artifacts and traits are all very much geared toward making them much harder to kill. They're not really oriented at all towards making them more offensively more capable. They're just making them you can't put them down.
Absolutely. Like I've said before in other videos, and probably on this one too, my biggest fear with the Generals Handbook, with the match play system, and why I didn't think I would play it with Death, was that summoning had been so limited. And I know the summoning pool is cool and it allows you, variable options whenever situations arise to bring in what you need to, but with the nerf to casting spells and so consequentially summoning in and of itself even further than putting this points cap on it, I was worried about it because, like I said, Death units oftentimes were just getting blown off the table and you need to resummon them. But all these abilities have taken Death from that kind of spam summoning army to an anvil army. Even the chaff of Death has truly become anvils in their own right.
Yeah. It seems like Death is just going absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's unless you have something else on the Death stuff, we can move on.
Absolutely.
All right. Destruction. So their battle trait is Rampaging Destroyers. Roll a die in each of your hero phases for each unit in your army within 6 inches of a hero. That unit can move a number that equals the die roll as if it were in the movement phase. So you basically can get an extra d6 movement in the hero phase for each model within 6 inches of a hero. That's really powerful for destruction. Like all they want to do is go kill, and anything that gets them even a few inches across the battlefield faster, like that's awesome. Their command traits: Nothing Left Standing, pick a terrain feature within 6 inches. And at least 5 other friendly destruction models within 6 inches. That terrain feature no longer provides cover, and any scenery rules no longer can be used. So it basically just destroys a piece of scenery. You can just destroy scenery.
That can be quite powerful.
Yeah. And you can just see like that mental image of a bunch of orcs rampaging through, and they just like find a forest and they're like, no, there's not going to be a forest here anymore.
It's very fluffy. I like that one.
Yeah. Might is Right. Add 1 to the wound rolls made for all of the general's melee weapons. That's pretty strong if your general is riding on a monster.
Yeah. Just imagine that on a Maw Crusher.
Oh, yeah. That's crazy. Wild Fury, add 1 to the general's hit rolls if they have lost any wounds. Add 1 to the general's hit rolls and wound rolls if they have reduced to less than half of their starting number of wounds. So they get hurt, they get angry, they fight harder.
Yeah, that's a nice consolation prize if you have a big monster that's kind of lost a lot of its combat effectiveness.
Yeah, and it incentivizes you to really get your general in the fight, really get them in there, and gives you, usually if, the assumption would be that you're going to use that kind of command trait on a general that's like riding a monster. Right. And usually they have that diminishing profile, right? As they take damage, they're getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And in this instance, they're going to get a little bit stronger in some ways, in some regards, so to kind of balance that out. So that's kind of a cool option.
Yep. I like too how we're seeing already just between the difference in this and death is, whenever your commander dies, you obviously lose these abilities. But for death faction, you want to keep your commander alive already because they impact your force in so many different ways. And so, especially with that, basically 5-up ward save that you're gaining, you really want to protect your commander. And then in destruction, we're very much kind of following that very orky feel of the commander is the first one in the fight. And so these commander effects aren't really impacting those around them as much. They're more of, hey, that commander's bigger and stronger. Go get him in there. Go punch somebody in the face.
Yep. So number 4 is Bellowing Tyrant. Pick a friendly destruction unit within D6 inches of the general in your hero phase. Add 1 to the hit rolls for that unit until your next hero phase.
That's a great one. I think that's going to be great for some comedic laughs.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have that general on Maw Crusher, and there's going to be that unit like, 3-4 inches away, and you're going to be like, the commander's going to be billing, hey, you guys go kill them, and then it's going to be like you rolled a 1, and they just didn't hear him. It was like a squeak. The general's voice cracked or something and didn't quite make it out. Yeah.
But the general is within D6 inches of himself. Yep. So worst case scenario, he gets +1 to hit.
Yep, but you better pick yourself beforehand because it's pick it, then roll.
Oh, it is pick it, then roll. Oh, that's right.
Yep.
Sucks. Big and brutish, add 1 to the general's wounds characteristic. I mean,
it's nice.
Meh. All things considered, kind of meh.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying it's great, but I'm saying if you're like rolling and you get that, especially if your general's on like a monster or something, then you're like, it's not a useless ability.
Right. Then I think this last one is my favorite. Ravager, add 2 to the die rolls for Rampaging Destroyer. So your rolls in the hero phase are D6 plus 2 inches of movement.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So your orcs and ogres and goblins, they're
starting to imitate flesh eaters.
Yeah, they are just going to be like running across that battlefield. They're going to be scary fast.
Yeah, I don't think that it can really be overstated how important getting movement and stuff in the hero phase can be, especially in Age of Sigmar. Movement is so important. Where you move, how quick you move, and reacting to opponents, and really denying opponents opportunities to do things. And being able to move in the hero phase in addition to the movement phase just takes that to a whole new level.
Yeah, definitely. I find myself very frequently leaning very hard on cavalry type units, whether they be demigriffs or knights or Pegasus knights. Anything that moves 10 inches or more, I'm all about it.
Yep. These are the chaos artifacts, by the way. The death one or the destruction ones were above it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, this set of images is not in the best shape.
Yep.
All right. So, Meteoric Hammer Blade. Pick 1 melee weapon that the bearer can use. Can't be its mount's weapon. Instead of attacking normally with that weapon, the bearer can use it to smash the ground. If you do, roll a die for each model within 3 inches of the bearer. On a roll of a 5 or 6, the model belongs.
Yeah.
Wound.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was an awkward wording.
That's all good.
So let's see. Roll a die for each model within 3 inches of the bearer, and then on a 5 up, they take mortal wounds. That's
right. The important thing to note is that the more models that a unit has within range, the more potential mortal wounds the unit itself would take.
Right. Talisman of Protection. Roll a die each time this model suffers a mortal wound. On a roll of 4 or more, the mortal wound is stopped by the talisman and has no effect. So, Rare little defensive item for destruction.
Keeps them fighting a little longer.
Yeah. Gem of Seeing in your hero phase. Pick an enemy model or enemy unit within 12 inches of this model. Add 1 to all hit rolls for that model against the chosen unit until your next hero phase. So
it's not bad. I mean, you're basically if you're going to be in combat with something because you're going to charge it, or you're already locked in combat with something, then and it's something that you can keep changing. So I'd say that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a trend with this, as well as just in general with these, that there seems to be a really big advantage with this set of rules to playing with a general that is riding a monster.
Yes.
There just seems to be a huge advantage to do that, because a lot of these artifacts are giving buffs to like combat oriented capabilities. And if your general is a guy on foot or even a guy like on horseback, you're probably not getting them in a fight, right?
Yeah, but, I mean that's really the direction that match play has quite clearly taken. It's nerf summoning, it's nerf spellcasting. It's really embracing the really big, scary, rock'em sock'em kind of beat 'em up monsters, which is clearly the direction GW wants to take match play in, and that's part of why they keep releasing these models like Alariel coming out and like Archaon before and all.
Yeah. All right, the Blade of Vituperation. In the combat phase, you can reroll failed wound rolls for enemy. You can reroll
one failed wound roll for each enemy hero within 12 inches of this model.
Okay. I am like having trouble reading this crap. I do not know what's wrong with my eyes right now. But that's not bad.
Yep.
All of these are very much oriented towards just combat with that hero, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is death. I mean, destruction. So you very much expect your force to be mobbing the opponent and probably relatively tightly packed combats, and that's why so many of these are such short range.
Yep.
Combat buffs.
All right. Collar of Domination. At the start of an enemy's movement phase, pick an enemy monster within 3 inches of this model. So
in combat.
Your hero in combat with a monster already during your hero phase. Check. Then roll 2 dice and add them together. If the total is equal to or greater than the enemy monster's bravery, it must retreat in that movement phase.
This is probably the one that I would take if I was playing Destruction. I mean, all of these are good, but the ability to literally force that opponent's monster out of the combat and to basically do nothing for that turn is huge. And this, especially if you're in trouble with your general for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yep.
This can be like the question we were asked earlier. This can be basically like taking a retreat action for yourself, but you're not getting any of the drawbacks from it if it's just your general versus that monster.
Right. And the last one, the Battle Brew. In any of your hero phases, you can declare this model will drink either 1 or 2 swigs of the Battle Brew. If the hero takes 1 swig, add 1 to all hit and wound rolls of the model until your next hero phase. If the hero takes 2 swigs, add 2 to all hit and wound rolls for this model until your next hero phase. But the hero then suffers 1 mortal wound at the start of each of your future hero phases for the rest of the battle.
It's also important to, again, point out here the rule of 1, that 1s always fail. So if your general is already at a 3-up, then there's not necessarily any point in drinking the double and taking the mortal wound because 1s will still fail.
Yeah, but man, is that that's all to hit into wound rolls.
Yep.
So man, that is so good if you're throwing this item on, again, a hero on a monster. I think
Maw Crusher is always the go-to example with these.
Yeah, that is clearly what every single one of these is designed around, right? Like you want to get these things to the dude on a Maw Crusher, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I like it. It's all of these things are very much themed around destruction. They all just make you want to go fight. Make your opponent run away from you. Make you get all kinds of crazy buffs in battle. Make you just slam the ground and do mortal wounds. It's cool. I like it. it fits the fluff. It fits the gameplay. It's beautiful. I like what they did here.
If for no other reason than because it's the most fun, is it safe to say that we both would pick the Battle Brew as our default?
Oh God, I would take the Battle Brew so much, and I would take that double swig all day long, like first turn. Like just stagger around drunk for the rest of the game. That would be just fine.
Right.
All right, you want to take Chaos?
Oh, sure. I'll try to be fairly quick through these. The Dark Avenger, your general and all friendly Chaos units within 10 inches of them add +1 to hit rolls against units with the order keyword. So unfortunately, relatively situational that it's not against just anybody, but nice if you know you're playing against a Stormcaster or other army. Spiteful Destroyer, add 1 to wound rolls made for the general's melee weapons, including their mounts if they have one. So really good, especially for, not obviously not Archaon because he's the named character, but for big guys like him that have lots of attacks and have mounts that are fairly powerful in and of themselves. Cunning Deceivers, which is Vince's favorite one. Subtract 1 from the hit rolls of all enemy attacks made during the first battle round. Important to point out that this is all hit rolls, which it includes your opponent's shooting attack, so it's not limited to their close combat, because you might think, well, that's stupid. It's not likely that we will be in close combat in the first turn, but this also protects you from free peoples just shooting the heck out of you. Lord of War.
Like a bad thing that we shoot the heck out of people.
Well, I'm just saying if you're the Chaos player, you're not looking at it favorably. Right. Pick a friendly Chaos unit within 3 inches of the general in your hero phase. Add 1 to their hit rolls for that unit until your next hero phase. It's nice. You get to buff a unit whenever you think it's opportune to do so. Terrifying Presence. Subtract 1 from the bravery of enemy units within 3 inches of this general. Again, it's unfortunately relatively situational one. Against most death units, this is going to, for example, be relatively ineffective because most of them are rocking a 10 leadership. And with their new basically 5-up board save on top of any save that they have already, if they have one, it's just going to be hard to take out enough to force that many bravery checks that would fail. Great Destroyer units are affected by the unpredictable destruction on a 5 or 6 instead of only a 6. And unpredictable destruction is unfortunately what I skipped over, which is their battle trait, which just is that roll a die when you pick a Chaos unit from your army to attack in combat that's within, is it 8 inches? It's kind of fuzzy.
Yeah,
of your general or another hero. On a roll of 6 or more, you can add 1 to all of your hit rolls for the unit being rolled for in that phase. So it operates somewhat similarly to the death one in that this is that bonus. So instead of a +1, you're at a +2. Again, ones will always fail. So unfortunately, it's somewhat circumstantial if your attack is already really good. But for lots of things, this obviously can help you quite a bit.
Yeah.
And again, it's all heroes, not just your commander. So like death, your heroes become batteries of sorts in this way.
Yeah. And it's scary that it's making all of your Chaos dudes get potentially +1s to hit. Like, there's not a lot of that in Chaos, so that gets terrifying really quickly.
Unless, of course, you're bloodbound.
Yeah. They have some of it, but not a lot.
Yeah.
They mostly get extra attacks, which is even more terrifying.
Yeah. Especially when you combine that with the bonuses on your to hits and wounds and things like that.
Yeah.
But for the artifacts of Chaos, we have the Daemon Weapon, which is just whenever you roll this result, pick one melee weapon that the bearer can use. It cannot be a weapon used by a mount. Roll 2 dice and add them together on a roll of 7 or more. You inflict 1 mortal wound automatically to an enemy model of your choice within 3 inches, or on a 2, which would be Snake Eyes. Inflict 1 mortal wound on the model that's using the weapon. So, somewhat risky, but you are far more likely to roll a 7 or more than you are to roll Snake Eyes. It's a 1 in 36 chance of rolling Snake Eyes, and 7 is the, right in the middle of the statistical average of what you'll roll on 2 dice. So far more of a positive than a negative there. You have the Chaos Runeblade, When you pick this one, pick one melee weapon that the bearer can use. It cannot be a weapon used by a mount if they have one. Increase the number of attacks made by the weapon by 1. So that's really good if you have, especially if you have a weapon that's like 1 or 2 attacks, but maybe inflicts D3 or D6 mortal wound or D6 wounds.
Yep.
And this is just giving you more opportunities to hit your opponent really hard. Then you have the Beguiling Gem. Once during the battle at the start of the combat phase, pick one enemy model within 3 inches, subtract 1 from all of their hit rolls in that combat phase. So it's nice. The only problem is that it's once per battle, but it's certainly a powerful ability. I know Death has some spells on certain casters that do that same kind of thing. Then we have the Chaos Talisman. Roll a die for each wound inflicted on this model. On a roll of 6, the wound is negated and has no effect. Add 1 to the roll if the wound was inflicted by a model with the Order keyword. So again, you see here another example of Chaos and Order are specifically designed to fight each other. Yep. This helps. This is very much like the Death faction's entire faction ability, but just limited to the one model. Next, we have Favor of the Gods, which is add 1 to the wound characteristics of this model. That's not something to be sneezed at, but again, it's the same kind of thing as we saw in the Destruction one. It's not terrible if you're rolling on the table. You're not going to like necessarily pitch a fit if you get it, but it's probably not the first one you're going to choose if you are allowed to do so. And then the Crown of Conquest. This model can use the Inspiring Presence command ability, even if it is not a general. If this model is a general, it can use the Inspiring Presence ability and another command ability in the same hero phase, or use the Inspiring Presence ability twice in the same hero phase. Which, Inspiring Presence is an ability that every general in the game has. I just often forget about it, and it's not particularly useful for Death faction.
Yeah, I usually don't use it either. I usually try and pick a general that I'm going to use their ability every turn.
Right.
The Inspiring Presence is usually just an ability that I use when I don't anticipate being able to do anything at all. Right. It's like just in case something weird happens that I don't expect, I guess I'll try and protect this unit.
And the nice thing about that one is that if you're playing and you decide not to give that to your general, then you do have, in essence, that second commander ability that you're getting to use each turn.
Yep. All right. So Order. So our battle trait is Defiant Avengers. We get to reroll Battle Shock for any units within 12 inches of a hero. That is pretty good.
Yep. I'd say that's really good, especially considering some groups, like I know a lot of the Free People's guys have lower bravery, and when I say lower, it's because I'm used to an army of 10s. And even Stormcast themselves are mostly in the neighborhood of 6 or 7.
Yeah. What's actually pretty sweet with this is the Empire Generals banner lets you roll on 2d6 and take the lowest for Battle Shock. And then this then lets you re-roll that. And most of the banners in the Free People army let you ignore Battle Shock if you roll a 1. So you basically have up to 4 dice to potentially roll a 1 on.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, so it's almost ignoring Battle Shock altogether. All right, so our command traits, Strategic Genius. This is similar to that Chaos item that we just looked at. Once per battle, your general can use 2 different command abilities in the same hero phase, or it can use Inspiring Presence twice. Definitely pretty strong.
Yep.
The biggest use that I see for that is actually using this in scenarios, like using this set of rules and applying them to the scenarios where you get extra command abilities.
Right, because otherwise you only have the one that's listed and Inspiring Presence to use the 2 different ones.
Exactly. Inspiring doubles the range of Defiant Avengers.
So it's interesting how Order is so inspiring. We have Inspiring Presence, and now we have Inspiring the command trait.
Yeah.
Your Inspiring Presence is extra inspiring.
Yeah. All right, Reckless. I think this is my favorite command trait for Order. It lets you re-roll run and charge rolls for your general and all friendly Order units within 10 inches of your general.
It's pretty good, especially for cavalry army.
Yeah, like that is phenomenal. I am a huge fan of that, especially when you're already, with Bretonia and Empire cavalry already getting augmented charges.
Mm-hmm.
This lets you really attempt some long charges on a regular basis and get them off. Regularly going for that like 10 or 11-inch charge isn't that crazy.
Yeah. It makes me wish that was available to the Death Faction, because I could have used that today. But I'll touch on that in the misplay of the day after all this.
Yeah. Tenacious, add 1 to your general's wound characteristic. Woo!
Third time we've seen that.
Yeah, there's one of those everywhere. Legendary Fighter, add 1 to the number of attacks your general makes with one of its melee weapons. A different weapon can be chosen in each combat phase, can't belong to the mount. Master of Defense, roll a die for each wound or mortal wound inflicted on your general. On a 6, the wound is ignored, so he basically gets a 6-up ward save.
Yeah.
So altogether, I mean, those are pretty good, I would say.
Which one are you most likely to pick most often?
Oh, Reckless every time.
Okay.
Like every single time I would go with Reckless. If I was taking more than one, possibly, I'm not even sure what I would do. I
think Inspiring, maybe.
Maybe Inspiring, depending, I think it depends on who my general is. If I'm taking a general on a horse, I think I might take Master of Defense to make him last a little bit longer, or maybe just take Tenacious to make him last a little bit longer. Or if it's a general on a Griffin, I might take a Legendary Fighter to make him a little more fighty, because some of his attacks are really powerful.
Makes sense.
All right, and then our artifacts, Quicksilver Potion. You can take the potion once per battle at the start of the combat phase. This model attacks in the combat phase before any other model and before the player whose turn it is taking place picks a unit to attack with. So that basically means if it's your turn and you would be the first one to choose a unit to attack with, this gets to go first, and then you get a second one in a row.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah, that is really nice. That kind of goes along with the old always strikes first kind of ability that the elves had.
Yeah. It's nice too, because in Age of Sigmar, with the alternating activations in combat, who you pick to go to attack first with is, or really at any point in the combat phase, is incredibly important, and it has a huge impact on whether or not you win the game. If your model has already been attacked and there's nobody else in combat that can attack that particular model, then it's advantageous to wait till later, maybe till the end of your combat phase, to attack with that unit, because they're not going to die, they're not going to take anything more. But this really allows you, especially if you're fighting something big and scary, to be like, I have 2 units on this one guy, I really need to kill it. Boom, boom, I attack twice in a row before it even has a chance to strike.
Right. All right, so our next one is the Obstinate Blade. Pick one melee weapon that the bearer can use. Can't be the mount. Increase the Rend characteristic by 1 on that weapon. Oh boy, I like that. That is a unique ability among all of these. Like, nothing else lets you augment Rend in all of these abilities. Yep. And there's not too many other things in the game in general that augment your Rend.
And Rend is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and let me just look up the War Scroll real quick because I want to make sure that I'm not misquoting something here.
I mean, I don't mind Ren too much because I have so many ethereal units that ignore it. But for the rest of you mortals, I understand.
Yeah, I mean the general on a Griffin, and I believe the general on, yeah, both of your free guild generals, the general on a horse and on the Griffin, have a great weapon
Mhm.
that already has Rend 2, so you can bring it to Rend 3 with this.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
So
that's
take a 3-up armor save down to a 6-up, or a 4-up or worse armor save just fails to even exist against this weapon.
yep. And then combining that with Legendary Fighter, now
Yep.
that goes from 3 attacks to 4 attacks, Rend 2 to Rend 3. Suddenly, that's
It's
a really obnoxiously fighty uh, general.
it's also incredibly powerful on like the Tree Lords and the new Spirit of Durthu, if that is in fact what we believe it to be, where it's just Durthu's old profile, just genericized but kept basically the same.
Right.
Because the Tree Lords, I believe, have D6 damage, and Durthu, if I'm not mistaken, has 6 on his attack when he's not damaged at all. So the ability, and even if it is D6 for him as well, the ability to increase the rend and increase the number of attacks on a D6 damage weapon is not to be undervalued.
Right. Absolutely. All right. So the Relic Blade is the next one. Pick one melee weapon that the bearer can use. Increase its damage characteristic by 1. That is another fantastic one.
Yep.
Hoarfrost. When you roll this result, pick one melee weapon that the bearer can use. If an enemy model suffers any wounds from this weapon and is not slain, subtract 1 from its hit rolls for the rest of the battle.
That is very powerful.
Yeah.
Especially against any of my vampiric units, because the likelihood that they start regening and not dying is very high. So if you can hit them early in the battle, you've crippled them for the rest of the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're playing against a death faction player, that might just be the one for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Talisman of Blinding Light. You can use the amulet once per battle at the start of the combat phase. Subtract 1 from any hit rolls for attacks made against this model for that combat phase. So it's a little bit of a defensive buff.
Yep.
And a Phoenix Stone, you can heal 1 wound suffered by this model in each of your hero phases.
Basically, you gain the vampiric ability just a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because the vampiric ones have to kill something typically, and this is just, you just heal.
Yeah. That's
really good.
awesome.
Yeah. Man, that's tough. I'm going to ask again, since you're the main order player, which of these do you think that you're most often going to take? I understand that they depend widely on which hero you're taking and what army you're going to fight against, but if you just had to pick one, you say, yeah, I could see myself taking this most often against most opponents, which would it be?
Oh, that is a really good question. I think probably the Obstinate Blade seems really attractive. Rend is extremely valuable, and being able to get extra Rend is just so rare.
Yep.
And having a general just be able to, at that point, basically be able to have all of their attacks do mortal wounds is incredible.
Yep, absolutely. I think for myself, it would be a tough choice between 4 or 6. I think that 6 is awesome. Anytime that you can, basically have your commander healing himself, especially on these big monsters that have these tables, which, as we mentioned already, most of these rules are really pointing you towards bringing the big generic dudes on the big scary monsters. The Phoenix Stone clearly helps you with that. It keeps your general alive longer, and it improves your combat effectiveness. If you retreat out of combat for whatever reason, to kind of give yourself a turn or two where you're not being hit, then you can kind of chain that up, whatever it might be. But the Hoarfrost is incredible. I mean, it's not just enemy heroes; it's any enemy unit. If you hit them but you didn't kill them, it's they're forever weakened. Now I understand that it says models, not units. So like if you're attacking zombies or something that's like a 1 wound model, then they don't suffer the penalties of this. But any kind of enemy monster, whether it's something smaller like a Korgorath or the other ones that are kind of a little bit smaller like that, like a Bone Giant or whatever, like this still applies to them as well as any hero. And it's because I'm a Death Faction player, I think so much of how powerful this would be against Death armies that and Nurgle, I'd probably take that one more often than anything else.
Yep. Yeah. So I know I'm pretty happy with these in general. I feel like they're pretty well balanced between all of the factions as well. The death ability to get the 5-up ward save seems like it would be really powerful on the outset, but I think because of the nature of how death was and how nerfed summoning is, I think that's like the right kind of counterpoint for death to have to balance summoning.
I agree. I think that something very powerful was needed because summoning, and just not even necessarily summoning powerful units, but the ability to cast the same spell to summon multiples of it, whether it be 2 or 3 squads of zombies in a turn, some squads of skeletons, whatever it might be. The ability to summon multiple of it was so powerful that we needed something powerful kind of in exchange for losing that. But also, even if you look at that and you get past that, right, you just say, okay, that's ancient history, who cares? We want balance play between each of these factions. Then, the death one is incredibly powerful. It affects your entire army in a way that I don't think any of these other ones do. But It's also the biggest penalty if you lose your commander. Now, that's going to be tough. A good death player with this ability is going to speed bump, block you, and hide their general out of line of sight if that's necessary, whatever it might be. There's lots of ways that they can protect them and keep most of these generals that they'll take alive for a long time. But again, if you're able to get just a little bit lucky or kind of trick your opponent and kill that general, then boom, that super powerful ability is gone, and suddenly Death Faction is at your mercy.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like how the 4 battle traits for each of the Grand Alliances really ties in nicely to like the fluff of how that Grand Alliance kind of works. Death is harder to kill. Destruction moves across the table faster.
Destruction just gets more punchy.
Yeah. Chaos gets buffs to hit in melee, and Order gets to reroll Battle Shock, so they're increasing their bravery. They're less likely to run away.
Right.
Interestingly enough, though, that does like nothing for the Seraphon, right? This just doesn't help the Seraphon at all. Right.
I mean, it does a little bit, but you're right. It's the least significant for them being the 10 bravery Order army.
Right. So broadly speaking, for the game in general, what are your takeaways from this?
It's, at least for my experience of, again, I've only played one game, but it's changed the way that Death Faction is in the game and interacts with the game completely. It's a 180-degree turn. We go from weak little models that get removed off the table like crazy with big powerful monsters to an anvil. We are, as long as our generals are around and our other heroes are around to kind of give these abilities to our troops, we're nearly an immovable object in many ways if properly positioned and all. Which is good and bad. I'm glad that we have something powerful to exchange for summoning. I think maybe, I mean, I'll need to play more games with it, but I just first impressions that it might be a bit too much, especially with all the abilities the death has to regen stuff so easily, or summon in other things with the summoning pool. Zombies can, join up into squads together. They can merge squads, things like that, to kind of rebuild in another way. Basically, there's just so many ways that death can keep themselves on the table anyways, that basically giving them a 5-up ward save may be too powerful. It again ties back to that video that I spotlighted with Vince, that offense is better than defense in making a good game because it rewards the players more. And I'm afraid that Death Faction's defense may have been up so much that it becomes a less enjoyable experience for an opponent of a Death Faction player, because you're not removing models in the same way that you might expect. You might not be removing models hardly at all at times.
Yep. I think my biggest takeaway overall from this is that the game suddenly becomes a lot more about the general. When you take your opponent's general down, or when your general gets taken down, you lose a lot more.
Yes.
Because all your battle trait and your command traits and probably your artifacts are all sitting on the general.
Yep.
So what does that do strategically? Well, you're going to be gunning for the general all the time.
Yeah, whether they're a summoner or not.
Right. And so what is your natural response to that? Well, it makes taking a general that is a hero on a monster with a good save that much more attractive. It's making me seriously reconsider my force compositions and how I play the army. Like, I've been consistently playing, my free people general on a horse or on a Pegasus rather, back before the Order of Grand Alliance book came out, and just using the hold the line command ability, to give +1 to hit and +1 to wound, to buff a lot of my shooting and to buff guys already in combat. And now he only has 4 wounds and a 3-up save, and
right.
I don't feel comfortable putting that many eggs into a 5-wound basket. Right. And it makes me want to take a general on a Griffin instead.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But I think that's intentional. I think that the match play system, like I said earlier, is designed to be a bit more of a punch 'em up kind of style. And that's not to say that shooting doesn't have a place and shooting isn't powerful. It certainly is. But it's designed to be very much more this. It's moving away from magic. It's moving a little bit, and again, it's not realistic. This is not a game based on realism. There's not ints in the real world, and all these creatures and all that exist in Age of Sigmar. But it's changing the warfare style to something that more accurately reflects the real world in terms of things that are going to be far more prevalent, and the way that you're going to honestly win these battles.
Right. And it's really, at the same time, like, it's more fun too, right? For most people, you want to put your big flashy monster on the table and go kill stuff.
I think you're right. I think this is almost like taking a system that's designed more for a Spike, or even to a degree a Johnny, and this is kind of throwing Timmy a bone within the system as well.
Right, exactly. And I think they're trying to appease all of the different psychographic profiles in one spot. And I think they're doing that fairly effectively with it. They put together a point system, but it's not like this overbearing, over-analytical, precise point system. It's like everything's rounded out to 20 points, and everything is taken in groups of units, and we tell you what groups you have to take. So it's way more on rails than prior editions have been. And, it's incentivizing you to take big stuff. It's telling you have to take certain amounts of your core kinds of troops, your battle line troops. You're forced to take heroes. everything is saying, like, everything is, I think, from what I've seen so far, everything seems to be fairly costed. Some people were initially saying, well, I think the monsters are overcosted. Now that I'm reading all the rules, I'm saying, all of these heroes on monsters, they look on the surface like they're overcosted, but they have a premium built in there because there is definitely a premium to the fact that you're potentially putting a 14 wound 3-up save general on the table.
Right. And it's
so valuable now.
Yes, and it's so vitally important to your force that that general survives and is a significant contributor to the battle. I know in Vince's show I talked about that I thought a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon at 440 was vastly overcosted. After playing one game without one and using Arcana Black at 340, I've now completely revised that opinion, and I'm like, no, I'll pay the 440 almost every single game to have that unit that is so hard to remove from the table.
Right. And I think the ones always fail, at least in the Free People Force, really changes the game for me, because a lot of times I was trying to get units down to that automatically hit. Now that my goal is 2 to hit instead of a 1 to hit, there's less buffs that I need to throw around.
Right.
So that means I need less support characters and less buff wagons on the table. So I can get away with more troops on the table.
Or you can
Griffin.
Yeah. I was gonna say, or you can afford to invest more in your big heavy things, but
yeah, exactly. I haven't really seen anything too far. I've seen some things that are like where you look at two similar units and they're costed the same, and you're like, one of these is definitely stronger than the other.
Right.
They're the same number of points. This doesn't quite look right.
Right.
Other than those instances, though, like where it's like, one tick up or down on the scale, everything seems to be pretty fairly costed.
Yeah, I would agree. And at least in my experience, most of those kind of like, well, these things cost the same, but I wouldn't say that they're equal, is mostly across different Grand Alliance lines, which I think is okay because all the Grand Alliances kind of weigh different things differently because they're, more or less important to your grand scheme of things. Take the Dryad and Crypt Ghoul example. They're almost the exact same units. Crypt Ghouls are a little bit better offensively. Dryads are a little bit better defensively, but their base stat line is nearly the exact same. Dryads cost 20 points more for the exact same amount of units as a Crypt Ghoul. So when just comparing the two of them, you might say, well, the Crypt Ghoul is more valuable because you get a little bit more bang for your buck. But again, it just depends on what the Grand Alliance need, what that faction needs. That really determines it. And nothing is so far out of whack that you look at those points and you're like, I just can't pay that. Other than maybe for Death Faction, I argue that a Necromancer at 120 is borderline unplayable. But I've seen very few of those units.
What makes them unplayable at 120? Yep. Are you there? Did I lose you? Was there a power outage? Was there a sudden? Did the South suddenly secede from the Union again?
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Internet dropped for a second. What were you saying?
I was just asking if Texas was seceding from the Union again, and that's why you were backing out for a moment there.
No, I missed the question.
I totally forgot what the question was.
Something about the Necromancer, I think.
Oh yeah. So why do you think the Necromancer isn't worth 120?
Sure. I don't have my book on me, but I have my phone. So the Necromancer is 120, right? And he's, well, I can't pull it up. But anyways, the Necromancer is 120. He's not very powerful offensively. His spell is decent. Van Hell's Dance Macabre. He basically you pick a zombie or a skeleton unit or a Crypt Ghoul unit. Basically, if it has the Death Rattle or Mordant or Flesh Eater keyword, something like that, basically you get to pile in and attack twice with that unit. It's a powerful spell, right? But oftentimes the reason to take a Necromancer was you take multiple of them and you could buff multiple of those squads or whatever. But he's a single spell casting model that has 5 wounds, not a great save, very few attacks, and he's 120. Conversely, you have a Ghoul King that you can take on foot for 20 points cheaper that has 5 attacks to, I believe the Necromancer has 1. He has 5 attacks. He's hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s with a -1 Rend for 1 damage, and his unique spell only affects Ghoul units, Flesh Eater Court units, but he can cast it on himself to give himself a 6th attack if he needs to, in addition to having, of course, Arcane Shield and Mystic Bolt, or backwards. But anyways, in addition to those 2 spells, he's a little bit faster. He's a little bit more, of a significant fighting presence on the table. And he does give you your 1 spell that you can use to summon other things or whatever if you need to at will.
All right, so that argument makes sense. So that's basically one of those, like you have these 2 similar units that are costed differently and they're of similar power. Why is this one a little bit different in cost than this other one is? They should probably be the same.
Right, or even the Ghoul King may be a little bit more expensive just because of the fact that he is so much more powerful in combat. The one thing the Necromancer does have that I can maybe see as to why you would do this is the Necromancer has a 5-up ability to, if he takes a wound or a mortal wound, to pass it on to another death model within, I think it's 12 inches range, and it counts as a mortal wound to the unit that takes it. Well, now with this new Death Army ability, there's a 5-up chance that that model doesn't even take that wound, right? So you can, you can with your Necromancer roll, and if you failed that 5-up, then you can instead pass it on to the other guy, and then he has a chance of ignoring it as well. So sure, that's a nice ability, and it gives you a little bit more chances to kind of bounce around a wound till it doesn't exist anymore, but it's a 1 in 3 chance, and the deficiencies of the model when compared to a Ghoul King, I do not think are made up for by that ability to be worth the 20 points more.
Right. That's fair. Yeah, so this definitely is going to change the game a lot. I think it's really going to change how people are composing their forces. I think for me personally, it's not actually going to change my armies that I'm bringing to the table all that much. But I think that's because I'm the kind of guy that wasn't bringing crazy forces to begin with. I like to bring nice, balanced forces, and I wasn't doing crazy min-max stuff to begin with.
Right.
So my table is going to look pretty much the same as it always has. I think for some other people, it may end up making it much different if they weren't using battle line troops for whatever reason.
Right.
Stormcast may be hurt by this if they're being forced to take like Liberators all the time. I don't know all of Stormcast. Let me see if I have that available in easy to view fashion.
Oh, you want to know what their points are or something?
No, like what the Stormcast, like what units
battle
are
line
in the Stormcast?
It's Liberators and Prosecutors, the bow armed units, or not Prosecutors, Adjudicators.
And that's it.
And you're looking. Yeah, those are the 2 standard ones. I think that you gain access to 1 more if you just play Stormcast, but I can't be sure off the top of my head. Really, it's a moot point. You wouldn't want to do that as opposed to taking the general abilities that you can gain by just being order. It's not going to be worth it. But the Liberators are 100 for 5, and the Adjudicators are 160, I believe it is, for 5. And the Adjudicators are overall, in my opinion, a far superior unit to Liberators. Liberators can't have Rend. It's either you give them the swords where they're a little bit better at hitting, a little bit worse at wounding, 3s and 4s, or hammers, which are 4s by 3s. You're looking at, if you take the shields, you're looking at a 4-up save rerolling 1s. If you take 2 of whatever weapon you have, then you're looking at rerolling 1s to hit. So like they have 2 wounds each. So you're looking at like decent battle line troops, but again, they just struggle to crack through things, which is something I definitely covered in my video reviewing them after I played as them. But yeah, they're not particularly impressive to me.
Yeah, I feel like if I was playing Stormcast, I would probably fill out most of my battle line with Judicators. Right?
Absolutely. I would take nothing but Judicators, and then the rest of my points, things like Retributors and the other big Paladins that actually have the ability to punch through stuff with Rend.
Right. So that may be one of the factions where you're a little bit deficient in the battle line area. Yeah, so I think this is all really interesting. Do you have any other thoughts on the Grand Alliance book for right now? I mean, not Grand Alliance, Generals Handbook.
The Generals Handbook, yeah, especially talking about match play. I think we've covered it really well.
Yeah. I really don't have anything else in my head about it right now.
Okay, well then that brings us
play of the day.
Yes, to the best segment, right? Misplay of the day, where we get to show you that, despite the fact that we can talk about tactics all day, and that, for myself, and I know for you too, Paul, that it's a passion and it's something that I love to study. Tactics and battlefield tactics. I play tactical games all the time. I apply tactics to any kind of competition I do, in any walk of life. But today, my misplay of the day came when I was testing out the new match play system. I was playing a 2,000 point game against an opponent who was also bringing 2,000 points worth of a death faction army. I had the Coven Throne as my general. My opponent had a Vampire Lord on Nightmare Steed or something like that, just basically on horse. And he had Manfred, and I had Arcan, which we thought was funny because that's 2 times those guys have had duels in the recent novels, and both times Arcan's come out on top. Well, in this game, it didn't go that way. Arcan died by Manfred's hand. But early on in the game, I kind of looked at how the rules were and all, and knowing about this, new 5-up ward save and how difficult that could make it for either of us to really kill the opponent, even though we both had a lot of Rend on the table. I knew I had to strike quickly, and I was trying to destroy my opponent's fortification before they destroyed mine. That was the objectives for the mission in terms of who won. And I knew Manfred was the biggest, scariest thing that he had on the table. I knew that if I killed Manfred, that his commander and his few other heroes that he had, that were none of the other ones were on monsters. All of them at best were on a horse or on foot. They would be much more easily dealt with by my army. The only other big thing he had was a Terrorgeist, which isn't a hero. And so anyways, I had moved up my Coven Throne and Arcan the Black. I moved them up a little bit beyond my lines, and I had extended my forces a little bit too far. And I knew that going into this moment. But I knew that with how powerful Manfred was in close combat, that he could outclass either of my 2 behemoth heroes, my 2 big heroes with the monster profiles and the kind of diminishing returns. So I put both my guys within relatively easy charge ranges of 7 and 8 inches each. And I rolled for Arcan first, and I rolled a 7 on the charge, needing an 8 to get within charge range. So I failed. And I had the option with the scrying pool that comes on the Coven Throne of rerolling any single dice roll. Notice that it's dice, so you get to reroll all the die, all of them that you're throwing, not just a single one, in any attempt that I need during the game, but it's a one-time use thing. And with Arcan's special spell, the Curse of Years, where you roll 10 dice, and every 6 you roll is a mortal wound, then you roll those dice again that were 6s, and now you need 5s, and then you need 4s, and you continue on until you fail to successfully roll or the opponent's dead. That's a very powerful ability. So I was hoping to save it to use that spell, and I did, but not to great effect. I inflicted 4 mortal wounds with the reroll with that spell, but I really should have used it to get that charge off, because if I had been able to hit Manfred on my terms with both those units in the same combat phase, obviously not both before Manfred could have struck, but at least one of them, and then use the other one to try to finish him off, I probably could have killed him that turn, and the entire battle definitely would have gone my way. I ended up losing the battle. It was hard fought. It was close. I feel like the points were pretty well balanced, but not being able to get that charge off while taking that gambit of, knowing that if I wasn't successful, that it could come back to haunt me, but not fully committing and taking that reroll, instead holding back a little too much and trying to save that reroll for that spell down the line definitely cost me the battle, because I ended up losing Arcan to Manfred in another couple turns, and my Coven Throne got mobbed by a big group of zombies and several spirit hosts that just slowly wore her down And every time she'd try to retreat, he'd just throw something else at her to slow her down until the rest of them could catch back up. So that was definitely the decision that the whole battle turned on.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sounded like that was a really tough call to make, too.
It was. Going back again, I would probably make the same gambit because Manfred outclassed anything I had in combat. But definitely would have taken that reroll for the charge, knowing how critical that would have been to winning or losing. Because the Coven Throne did succeed in her charge, but I opted not to take it because I decided that her by herself was not, the odds were not enough in my favor of winning that fight without Arcan up there with her to kill Manfred before he could bring up additional troops to respond.
Right. All right.
So I guess that's all for this episode. I know it's been a long one.
Oh, yeah, man. We've been going for, what, almost 2 hours now?
Probably pretty close to it. But
yeah.
There was a lot to cover, and I appreciate, Paul, you sticking out through it because I know on the East Coast we're just past 11 p.m. for you, actually.
Oh, it's all good. We can go work a little late tomorrow. Who cares?
I've got to get up and go to work at 5 a.m. So I'll be feeling it probably.
I guess sleeping for you is optional then.
Right. So I guess in the sake of Paul getting some sleep and myself, we're going to call it there. But thank you all for joining us, especially for our first live show. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you're able to learn something about the Generals Handbook, and as always, I hope that as a result of this show that you are able to grow into a better player and a better general on the battlefield. Paul, do you have anything you want to add before we sign off?
No, just everybody feel free to leave questions and comments below, like and subscribe, and we love to do the Q&A, so if you have questions that you'd like us to answer in our Q&A segment, leave them down below in the comments.
Absolutely. So all of y'all, I hope y'all have a good night, and we'll see y'all next time on Tactica Tuesdays. Goodbye.